Hi, I'm Nick Molden, and welcome to Molden and Schmidt, the podcast where we get to the bottom of the big questions about the future of motoring and, crucially, how we make it more sustainable. I'm the founder of a company called Emissions Analytics, which focuses on real world independent testing. In other words, finding out what really is the environmental impact of vehicles. And with me is Oliver Schmidt. Hi, Oliver.
Hi Nick, nice to see you again. My name is Oliver Schmidt. I'm what you would call a veteran of the automotive industry. I've been working there for more than 20 years, but to the majority of people, of course, I'm known by my involvement in the Volkswagen Dieselgate.
Which makes you an ideal man to start tackling the
Yeah.
question of today. Now, in previous podcasts, we've dwelt on some of the slightly more uh, scientific,
Mm.
abstract questions, tire emissions, and the like. Today, we wanted to make it very concrete about if I want to do the right thing in my choice of a more sustainable vehicle, what should I do? How should I choose? And I think where we should start is, and I will ask you this question in a second. If you're buying a new vehicle today, or even a used vehicle today, what are the sorts of things that people do think about, but also what should they be thinking about in terms of the environmental impact? And my reflection on it would be that if we just listen to the very high level political messages, we would get very confused very quickly. We obviously went through a phase some decades ago of downsizing, so go for the smallest car. Then we went through a phase in Europe of going diesel. You know, that was the right thing to do to reduce carbon dioxide emissions. Then, as you well know, that ended rather abruptly. Now we're being told that it's a battery electric vehicle, which is the right thing to do. In my view, all of those were oversimplifications, and to come up with things which are blanket solutions for everyone is not the right way forward. But how do you see it?
Yeah.
Where do you start?
I'm a bit afraid that we can't keep the promise that you just made, that we make it simple today. I'm of the opinion there is no simple answer to this whole question. It's always the question of the use case. How affluent is the people, the person that want to purchase a car? How do they really do they care for the environment more than for their own wallet or their own purse? In regards of money. So it's always a mixture that you have to consider. Then you have to see the discussion. Do we measure tank to wheel? Do we measure cradle to grave for the CO2 emissions? So that is the big question here, that we have to somehow cut the elephant into slices to get to the bottom of all these questions that are there. Then you have all the new renewable fuels that are coming out. So is it maybe the best to just drive your old car and just refill it with renewable fuels? It's something we really have to cut this into pieces.
Well, let's take one concrete example to get us going then. I, not so long ago, had a discussion with a relatively famous politician in the UK called Jacob Rees-Mogg, who claimed that it was more environmentally friendly for him to continue driving his 1936 Bentley than buying a new vehicle. Now, that
Hmm.
obviously brings in, under what is a deceptively simple question, things about, well, if you're driving a very old vehicle, the CO2 in building it was long, long ago, and actually getting the most out of it, the better. Keep it
Yeah.
going as long as it goes. But then on the other hand, the tailpipe emissions from a vehicle, that's from an era well before any after treatment systems. And so what's coming out of the exhaust is terrible for air
Yeah.
quality, lots of hydrocarbons, carbon monoxide, and the like. Generally speaking, where would you say, if it is possible to generalize at all, should people hang on to their old vehicle as long as possible, drive it into the ground, or should you always be upgrading for the latest, newest technology?
I think it's the same question like with your smartphone. Do you always go for the newest iPhone? Do you want the i15 Pro or whatever is available at the moment? So I think we all know that the about half of the CO2 emissions of a vehicle is generated while the vehicle is built. The question is now, how green is the manufacturer? How much of this CO2 can get already compensated while building the car? So that's the first question. So, and on an battery electric vehicle, it's even in the close to 60% that is generated during the production of the vehicle. So if you consider this, then of course the clear answer would be yes, please continue driving your old car. Regarding the CO2 footprint, this might be the best solution. But as you just mentioned on the tailpipe emissions, a car, I would say before 1985, 1990 is not equipped with a catalytic converter. So the hydrocarbons are horrible. You might even have, as you said, the high emissions of carbon monoxide levels. So this is something to consider. And I like this example of the old Bentley. My question would be, how often has this Bentley now being restored, resprayed, got an engine overhaul? So this is something that you all have to consider in the CO2 equation for this car. So if you have refurbished the engine, if you put new pistons in, new bearings, all this had to be manufactured and also left a CO2 footprint. So it's a bit naive to say the car has been built in the 30s. I bet this car is not running on his first engine bearings, his first pistons, and so on. It might not have the first paint. I don't know how many of the panels are still original and have been welded. So that's kind of naive. So for me, driving an old vehicle means a vehicle that is built on the road, that is safe to drive for the next years, and that doesn't require major maintenance except the regular maintenance like brakes, tires. Maybe if you have a rocker panel that's corroded, that you need to weld one rocker panel or small patches on the car, but not in a whole restoration of the car.
Absolutely, and I'm sure, knowing Jacob Rees-Mogg, that this particular Bentley will be in impeccable condition. So much
Yeah.
CO2 will have been expended on keeping it in good condition. But to extend the example, it actually, I think, illustrates another point. Is he was making that if he's only driving it a relatively small number of miles per year, it is actually better to, rather than having all the CO2 in building a new vehicle, just hang on to the old vehicle. And that contrasts with the choice we face with electric vehicles today. And you mentioned it about the higher CO2 in building an electric vehicle. And that's the nature of it. The battery has a lot of energy going into it. But what that means in practice is it only makes sense for the environment. If you buy an electric vehicle, you should drive it a long way. If you're buying an electric vehicle only to do a few thousand miles a year, actually that won't stack up. That there will be too much CO2 in building it and not enough miles that you're spreading that over. You would be better going for a small internal combustion engine with lower CO2 up front. The real
Yeah.
win, it seems to me, from an electric vehicle point of view, is people who will then really sweat that car a lot. They will drive a
Yeah.
long, long way. That's interestingly then when it comes into tension with the recharging infrastructure, because if you're driving it a long way, you don't want
Yeah.
the range anxiety. So it's not just that you'll be driving a long way, but driving a long way in places that have good recharging infrastructure. And I think that's the market that battery electric vehicles are good for, but not necessarily who are buying them today. A lot of those are being bought by people maybe as second vehicles, where the number of miles through them are smaller. But I don't know what you think to that, and where you see that hybrid vehicles fit into this picture.
Yeah. Okay. So coming back to the electric vehicle, yeah, I see that a lot of, or it's my personal perception that a lot of people are buying those car as their personal green band-aid. That they basically buy this car. I wouldn't say to show off, but to show off. So to showcase to the world that they have this that they embrace the new technology that by politics and everything is proclaimed to be more environmentally friendly than everything else. But as you mentioned, the recharging, especially in recharging, it's very important. If you drive the electric vehicle, try to find a source for as much as possible of green energy that you have. So the best for the electric vehicle is if you have solar panels on your roof at home, try to charge it there. Don't go to the supercharger or fast charger or whatever on the highway. Most of those are not powered by solar panels. They just take the electricity out of the grid with the, I don't know, the English or the British mix of electricity. Here in Germany, we are at the moment at around 50% regenerative energies. So if you get it out of the grid, you're not CO2 free. What you get out of the grid is still, at least for half of it, pollutant by the CO2 emissions coming out of the gas or coal power plants where the electricity is produced. So that's the one case that I see on electric vehicles. If you buy this car, you can buy it as a statement. Yes, you can, but I totally agree with you. The electric vehicle should be used for long range to offset the CO2 disadvantage that comes out of its production. And then when it's used, it should be used with green energy as much as possible.
And do you also think that geographically, certain countries should focus on electrification and others hold back? Do you
Yeah,
think there
of
should
course,
be
of course.
some sort of, so for example, do you think Poland, with its dominance of coal in the grid, should hold off on electrifying, whereas Norway, California goes much more strongly, where rather than having a blanket policy across the whole of Europe or
Yeah,
America for
yeah,
electrification?
yeah. Yeah, I think that that's a very valid point. So as you remember, when we remember the presentation that we saw in Prague, where they talked about the upcoming electrical grid from Poland, that Poland is currently planning to build 7 nuclear reactors. So now we can go into the discussion, is nuclear energy green energy or is it not green energy? What about, it might be green when I produce it, but I see it here currently in Germany. So Germany got rid of all its nuclear power plants, and the dismantling of those power plants is a mess. So this is something you have to consider there. So, but I would not focus this mainly on the question of the electricity source, also on the climate. As we all know, these videos from Chicago last winter, where all the Tesla drivers got stuck at the Tesla charger because it was too cold, the car didn't want to charge. So there's also something there, and we all know from driving electric vehicles in the winter when we turn on the heating, even if it's a heat pump. If we turn on the heating, the range goes down by 50% or something like this. So maybe the very cold countries that don't have a lot of regenerative energy are not the proper places to be. Norway is a different example because most of their energy comes from hydro. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And it seems that the worst scenario here is where a householder that's historically had, for example, a single diesel vehicle changes their household to having, say, one gasoline vehicle and one small electric vehicle. There you've got not only the embedded emissions in building those two vehicles,
Yeah.
but then let's assume that household is not driving any more miles in aggregate during the year. You're actually then spreading those manufacturing emissions over fewer miles per car.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
something that may be from the incentives that we're being given that people would think that that was a good choice, actually that is the worst possible choice. And paradoxically, that household might have been doing better for the environment by hanging on to that diesel vehicle. Um,
Yeah.
but I think clearly after we've been going through a process post Dieselgate where people didn't switch, they did not switch from diesels to electric vehicles, they switched from diesel to petrol vehicles,
Yeah.
which actually put up CO2 emissions by about 10 to 15%.
Yeah.
And maybe explain why petrol vehicles have greater CO2. People think of them as sort of clean alternative to diesel, but actually it's important to recall why we went for diesel in the first place. Can you explain why diesel vehicles are lower CO2? What is it about them?
It's always a question of the degree of efficiency. So we know that a diesel engine can get a degree of efficiency up to 42, 43, some even 44%. And this is mainly based on the higher combustion ratio. So combustion ratio means once the mixture of air and gas is in the cylinder, how much does it get compressed? Which factor? And a normal gasoline engine gets compressed by a ratio of 10 to 1, while a diesel engine, a modern one, is somewhere around 15 to 1. So you just compress the gas higher, which gives you then in the end the better efficiency for the diesel. So this is mainly the advantage of the diesel. The other advantage of the diesel is the diesel burns colder. The diesel burns about 100 degrees colder than a gasoline engine. So we all know that when you drive a gasoline engine very fast on the highway, at least here in Germany, where we don't have the speed limits, there is a certain speed over which your fuel economy gets totally bad. And this is when you need additional gas to cool the exhaust and the turbocharger of the engine, because normally it would get too hot, and you don't have this effect on a diesel engine. So those are the two main drivers in my eyes, why a diesel engine is always more fuel efficient than a comparable gasoline engine. The gasoline engines have taken a huge step. They got closer and closer with direct injection, with turbocharging, with downsizing. They got a lot better, but they will never meet the efficiency of a diesel engine.
And there's a paradox there because diesel as a fuel has more carbon in it per litre,
Yeah,
but it burns 20% more efficiently, something like
yeah,
that, which
yeah.
more than outweighs it. So a diesel vehicle delivers 10 to 15% less CO2 for every mile you drive. But before, obviously, we sound like diesel apologists. It's well, it's important. Clearly, diesel suffered a very bad time. But if when we're testing at emissions analytics the latest diesel vehicles, what we find is that they're cleaner for air pollutants in almost every respect compared to modern gasoline vehicles. So we've got this paradoxical state at the moment where we're being told to abandon diesel as fast as
Hmm.
possible when it still has a, say, 10% CO2 advantage, and the tailpipe pollutants are lower than gasoline in pretty much every respect. So I guess the punchline is or the question to you is, do you see there's any chance of a resurgence in diesel? Or put it another way, should people even consider buying a diesel? Should people have that in their mind when they're thinking? Uh, that should those
Yeah.
merits be allowed these days?
I think it's then a question also, like we discussed on the battery electric vehicle, a question of the usage of the vehicle. We know that the diesel has a higher price point. You mentioned that by now a diesel in emissions is equal, or as you said, sometimes even better than the comparable petrol vehicle. But this all costs money. You have your SCR urea system, to avoid NOx emissions. You have bigger particular traps on this. So the technology to get to these values is pretty expensive. So a diesel engine is always more expensive than the comparable gas engine. So this is then the question for the household. If you travel long distances, after a while you will get the payback. But if you only travel short distances, the gasoline engine might be the better choice.
Which suggests an interesting parallel then between diesel vehicles and battery electric vehicles.
Yeah,
They are the two candidate technologies of choice
yeah,
for people who drive long distances. And so
yeah,
perhaps then the pragmatic solution is where you have access to easy recharging, where your grid is nice and green, then
yeah,
that points you towards a battery electric vehicle. But if you're in a country where that's harder to charge or the
Mm.
grid is dirtier, then it may actually be best for the environment to stick with, or to maybe even return back to diesel vehicles. Um,
Uh,
but it seems then to summarise that the way I think about it is you need to start with what your usage case is. So what are you trying to do? How and
Yeah,
what's your
yeah,
pattern? How far are you trying to go? What do you need out of the vehicle? And
mm,
then you narrow down the type of technologies accordingly, rather than starting with broad generalizations as battery electric vehicles are good in all situations. So
yeah,
that's now, to cut through the
yeah.
complexity. But would you offer to the listeners any other good rules of
Yeah,
thumb as to how to
there's
choose?
there's for me one more point in this equation that you have to make your usage case and so on. It depends on what do you need for driving. So there are some people where I would say the diesel is the better choice, even if they have access to green energy and so on. Those are the people that don't stop while driving. So let's take the delivery driver. So the job of the delivery driver is to drive and deliver all the time and not to sit at a recharging point and wait, even if it's super fast charging, to wait 45 minutes to have his vehicle charged. Or the salesperson that goes from point of sales to point of sales trying to sell his product. So this person also depends on that he can drive as many miles as possible in the time frame of his working day. So this is the one point that you need to consider too. When you have the luxury that you can sit at your fast charger for an hour, check your email, work on your email, then the electric vehicle is fine for you. If you don't have this luxury in your business day that you can work on this during the day, then I would say the electric vehicle, if you need to recharge during your day, is not the option for you.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Oliver. I'm sure this is a topic we will come back to
Yeah.
on future podcasts, and it's quite clear, I think, that the advice for owners of 1930s Bentleys is hang on to your Bentley, but don't drive it very far. So that's our piece of consumer advice to end off the podcast. So, uh, my I've been Nick Molden from Emissions Analytics. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast. Oliver, thank you very much, and
Yeah.
uh, any last words you would like to say?
Yeah, yeah. This the no. I don't want to mention again on the Bentley, but I think we made enough of fun of this by now. The also is I think nobody else or not a lot of people could afford this Bentley. So I think it will not be the question of choice for all the people.
Great. Well, thank you. On that note,
But
thank you very much,
thank
Oliver,
you.
and talk to you next time.
Talk to you next time. Bye.